adaptation of something really popular comes out, there is a huge split between fans of the original of whatever it was, whether it be a comic book, a video game, an actual book, etc., and those who are new to it and simply want to enjoy the franchise as it has become. And I wanted to talk about this because with Game of Thrones is kind of was the thing that prompted me to discuss this, because I have seen this huge kind of like back and forth between Game of Thrones fans who are fans of just a show who are aggravated at book fans because they complain too much or they nitpick the show or things like that. And so there's been this huge split between people about what they like about it, and just kind of like this keeps this splinting between the two groups. And it was interesting to me because I feel like I end up being one of those people. When I was watching the show with my brother, this last episode that aired, I watched the episode with my brother, and he is not a book reader. He tried to read the first book. He's like still on like the third page as far as I'm concerned. He's had it for a while. And we're watching it, and I was writing my notes down for the video that I was going to be doing later, and I was like grumbling and stuff that would happen and whatever, and he would be like, "You're one of those people who believes that the books are infinitely better." And like when he first said it, it kind of bothered me because I'm just like, I don't think that the books are infinitely better. Like the books are all the way out here and the show is like a little shit turd. But there is gonna be there's this weird feeling of when you know how something is supposed to happen and then seeing that it's being changed in the media. And I think that was frustrating for the other side, that they keep hearing about how this thing is so amazing here or so great there, and it's like, well, that doesn't really affect me because I only have this frame of reference to deal with. And I remember I felt that way like when I did that podcast with Larry Williams from Otaku Assemble and a few other wonderful people who I was talking with. You know, when they would discuss certain characters and how they were discussing it from a show perspective. And so when I would come in and talk about this, it'd be like my only thing that I could really say in defense of certain characters like Sansa Stark was like, well, in the books. And it's like, that's not really an argument because that's not what they know. You can't have discussions about characters and themes when the two things in the two different products are completely separate. And how much does that really matter? To some people it may not matter at all, but I think that when you know what's supposed to happen, it's hard to let go of it, because in some cases, you know, you honestly feel like the way it originally went down was better, and other people just don't really give a shit. They just want to enjoy the show, because when it comes down to it, especially with Game of Thrones, I think the whole thing is that overall, Game of Thrones is a good show. It is really well done overall, consistently. And I think the frustrating thing is that you're hearing all these people talk about their issues because they love a certain character and they want to see more of that character, and that character is really getting messed up, and so that's the problem that people will have. Whereas for the people who aren't had that connection, and maybe like, that doesn't really matter to me because why should I care? I don't have that kind of connection with different characters. And so like that's why I made this video, because it's kind of like this always happens. Even in the days like saying like Harry Potter, like I think that it's Harry Potter, Lord of the Rings. I think it's sometimes really hard for people who read the books and read adaptations to let go. And I don't mean this in a demeaning way, because I think there's a difference between being a complete book purist and having qualms with an adaptation of the choices that they make. I think there's a huge difference between the two. And I said this in a video I did previously about adaptations. It's like I said there, I don't mind changes. I think some changes can be for the better. I actually like some changes that are made in Game of Thrones to the original source material. I enjoy some of the changes, but I cannot help it if I legitimately feel like something is better the way that it originally was. And people often say, well, for TV it has to be different. And I get that. When the writers, in their decision making, are making a series that works for TV. And I think that while that's a very good thing, what bothers me about that excuse is that it makes it sound as though for TV things have to be less complicated, less thought engaging. Because one of the things about the series of Song of Ice and Fire is that there really are no heroes and villains. Everyone's in conflict with somebody. Like, if you down with Team Lannister, your enemies are the Starks. If you're down with Team Stark, your enemies are the Lannisters. If you're Team Tyrell, your enemies are this, your enemy that. I'm House Martell Hollaback. My enemies are Lannisters. And, you know, I don't care for certain people and things like that. Whoever you like, that determines who you don't like. That's how the series has always worked, because no character in the franchise is perfect. Tyrion, not perfect. Daenerys, not perfect. None of these characters are perfect, because what A Song of Ice and Fire, the books are a lot of deconstruction of fantasy. And so, with the show Game of Thrones, a lot of it isn't. It's not deconstructional at all, really. And I think what was the real issue was that the first season stuck so closely to the book, and the changes that were made, people could for the most part understand. I can understand why Sansa was changed personality-wise in a few aspects in the first season, because the actress does look older, and it would be kind of weird to have her have a certain kind of mentality when, you know, when you're trying to do this kind of performance with a girl who obviously looks older than she is. So I got that for the most part. And this first season was so close that I think it gave people that standard that this is how it's going to be. The show and the book are going to be like this. And then with season 2, when they started to go awry, that's when people started to really get into these discussions and these arguments about who's doing it better, which version is better, and all these kind of things. And you see this a lot of time with comic book adaptations. Me personally, one of the reasons why I'm not, like, I like Nolan's Batman trilogy. I really, really do. But I always get into arguments with my brother because he's in love with Nolanverse completely and utterly. And that's fine, that's his prerogative, whatever. I like the two Tim Burton Batmans very much. And to a degree, like, my favorite of the live action Batman movies is Batman Returns. Done. Like, that's just my favorite one, because I feel that is the best bridge between the grittiness of Batman but the comic bookness of Batman, because it's still a comic book series, and I enjoy that. I like seeing comic book stuff in comic book movies. I feel like that movie really captured what that was about. But, like, ever since Nolanverse came out and that became the new standard, it became this idea that my brother, because he's not really into the comic books like I am, so for him, what drives him to love Nolanverse is not his love of Batman, but his love of how Nolan portrays Batman, how the story is just, you know, the rise and fall of the hero, all that kind of stuff. It as a film is what's important to him, not what Batman is in the film. And I think, like, you saw this a lot with in Iron Man 3 with the whole thing going on with the Mandarin, how that was a huge issue for comic book fans, and for people who either weren't comic book fans, or in my case, who didn't really care about the Mandarin to begin with. It was a completely different experience. And I feel like, you know, same thing with Thor and any kind of thing. If you know these characters and you have had a long-term investment in these characters, when you see them portrayed wrong, quite frankly, it's frustrating. It bothers you. Like, I'm sure if they made a Batman movie where Batman uses a gun, the entire comic book world would basically go into, like, an uproar about him willingly using guns and that kind of thing. Even though you could argue that some of the stuff he uses in Nolanverse is a lot like a gun, and therefore that would just be weird. But his use of guns, there are things that you just can't pick up. Like The Dark Knight Rises has been out for a while, but I'll label this anyway as a spoiler. I hate the ending of The Dark Knight Rises. I hate that ending. That's something that I just, it doesn't work for me. I can't see Bruce making the decision that he makes in that movie. It doesn't work for me. I don't see Bruce Wayne Batman making that choice. And so even though I get what Nolan wants to do, for me as a fan of that character, it's hard for me to be like, oh, it's just Nolanverse, he can do whatever he wants. It's like, it's not like, and that's the other thing, adaptations are weird because when it's an original piece, you have a sense that the writer owns that work and it's all of his stuff, so he can do whatever he wants with it. But when you do an adaptation, it's a sense that like, it doesn't belong to you. That you, as someone who chooses a new adaptation, you still don't own these characters. You didn't make them. You haven't, carved out their long history and comic book canon. You are simply taking parts of it and putting it on screen. So you don't just get to be like, oh, well, I think this, and then be like, blah, blah, whatever canon, I'll just do whatever I want. And I think that's what's frustrating, is that, like, when you have that background of knowing they changed this to make it more palpable for young audiences or movie audiences, and that's kind of just like, no, it just doesn't work. I remember, what was another big thing that came up? I know with The Walking Dead, even though I haven't really got into The Walking Dead, there are huge issues there between comic book fans there and the adaptation. And from what I've heard with the change that they made to certain female characters, I don't blame them. There is nothing worse when an adaptation takes a really strong, a really well-written female character and rips them apart. As Sansa fans duly note. It's hard and it's frustrating. It's hard and it's frustrating because you care so much about these characters and you had so much time to care about them. Like, because I finished the first 4 books of Game of Thrones before the 2nd season came out. So A Storm of Swords is my favorite book in the series. So, like, when this season came out, this first part, I was mega hyped for it. And the thing about it, too, as much as there are things that I critique in my videos about Game of Thrones, I do actively still enjoy the show. It's just a matter of, like, there are things I enjoy about it, there are things I don't enjoy about it. For me, it's all a matter of who you like, who you're invested in, and who you're not invested in. For me, as someone who doesn't like certain characters, when I see so much attention being paid to them that isn't really due, it bugs me. Like, and when I know that the writers are obviously biased in one character's direction and another, that bothers me because you're not writing your own thing. You can't be biased. It's not your material. You have to do what's fair to what was there before. That's how I feel about it. But when you have other people, it may be like, well, maybe I just don't want to see that on TV. And that's the other thing too. Certain things are more readable than they are watchable. And I get that. But at the same time, I feel like if people really were if they really were invested in telling a story about this character, they would make ways to make it happen. Like, I'm going to talk about this in a much later video, but like, if they wanted to show Sansa's depths and her character development, they could. And they would, if they really cared about it, in my opinion. But they don't seem to. To them, it seems to be a secondary issue. I mean, they were willing to make up all these scenes with Arya and Tywin, doing all these Tywin, Arya, Grandpa scenes with them together to show Arya's depth. But when it came to Sansa, they were fine with cutting off all her storyline to do nothing with her character, but give her a longer rape scene, attempted rape scene. That they could give her, but her actual storyline, pshaw. That they weren't able to do. And I think that when you have people with expectations, people who come with no expectations, then you have this kind of like weird soup where people are in conflict because one side wants something because they have been told that they should have it. They've already experienced it, they want to see it on screen. I feel like for a lot of people, for me, especially just speaking for just myself, the joy of watching Game of Thrones, besides the cinematography and the actors who are fabulous, is seeing how they will bring certain things to life. You know, especially this season. This season was big for wanting people to see stuff like Jimmy and Brienne road trip. That's what I was all about, man. You know, certain other things that might be coming up this season and stuff next season are that I'm watching this season so I can see those things. And I think when that's your experience, it's different because it's not about actively being engaged with the show. Well, you are being actively engaged. Let me scratch that. It's not about being sort of like surprised or excited about it. It's about enjoying the experience of seeing something come to life. For me, that was Harry Potter. Harry Potter was not so much born about, you know, being surprised. It's about living this experience in complete, you know, awe of what they did on the plane screen. Like watching the Battle of Hogwarts, watching Dobby die, watching Snape die, watching, you know, the characters really grow up and not just become taller versions of their little selves in my head. Seeing them age, seeing them bleed, seeing them die. That's what I was there to see that experience and experience that on a whole other level than just reading the material. And I think that, you know, for me, that's Game of Thrones. I want to see these characters. I want to see their trials, their tribulations, and see it not just in my mind, but projected onto the stage. And so when what's in my mind doesn't meet up with what was in with what's on screen, sometimes it's a case of like, what? In other cases, it can be brilliant. Like, I will say this, I will always love the 1995 A Little Princess. And Little Princess is my favorite book of all time. And that movie is not a faithful adaptation of the book in the sense of how it ends and everything like that. But the spirit of that book is painted in that movie. And I think that's what's really important overall, and what makes things work is like, it's not a matter of it being a perfect adaptation, I would say, in terms of book readers. I mean, yes, we don't like changes sometimes, especially if you're more of a purist, but if the adaptation takes something that was good, and with the changes it seeks to elevate it, or at least capture the heart of it, that's what's important, not the series of events. Like the third Harry Potter movie, it doesn't matter when Harry gets his fireball, so long as he gets it. And I think that what that movie did well was it took what was important, put it in there, made it fun, made it exciting, and then brought it to a whole other level. I mean, what made the first two movies good but boring is that there was no heart to it. It's more like paint by numbers Harry Potter. And I think that's different. I think that's kind of hard because you're like, well, if it's too close, you get bored. It's not about it being bored. It's about, like, you taking it and making something interesting out of it. You know, the first two movies, they were good, but they were not done with any sort of finesse at all. And that's just directorial things as well. And I think the finesse started in the third movie and continued. Then the sixth movie came, and it was a terror, and it needs to be destroyed. But then the other movies did the thing too. It all depends on how you are willing to make those changes and make things work and stay true to the character. I mean, it bothers me in the Harry Potter movies that how they changed characters like Hermione and Ron to fit what the director wanted and not what the series was. Like, okay, I don't even fucking like Ron and Hermione, but they get together. Their characters are important. Let them be the way they are. Don't make Hermione into somebody that she's not because that's what you're like. How she just wants to jump on the dragon. Are you kidding me? Hermione's afraid of heights. What's wrong with you? She ain't gonna jump on no dragon. What? It just those things bother me because it's like you are transforming that character in what you want. And so, like, I'm sorry, this is kind of rambly, but just something I observed is this whole conflict between people who are familiar with source material and care a lot about the source material and what it means to them, and then people who don't have that source material background, and so they're just kind of like, oh, whatever. And I think that sometimes it doesn't matter. Like, for me, do I care that the Vampire Diaries and True Blood are nothing like the books? No, because the books aren't that good at all. So, but I feel at the same time, it's like sometimes I'll compare the books to the show because I'll be like, at least the books at the beginning in some places had a sense of structure, where with True Blood just seems like, let's just be as crazy and camp as possible. I'm just like, you know, that's fine and all, and that's cool and all, but you know there's an actual storyline that you have to deal with that you haven't dealt with in like 2 seasons, you know? The True Blood just become fan service. The Vampire Diaries, that's just, it's not even anything anymore. It's just a bunch of crap thrown together, and wishes and daydreams and fairy tales. It's just a waste of time. And I'm done. I cut that cord. I'm done. I see what's happening on Tumblr. That's my Vampire Diaries experience. I'm done with that show. Anyway, that was my rambly rant for today. Thank you for putting up with me. Bye.